Hey guys, what's up and welcome back or to the Roomies Digest. My name's Christine, and if you clicked on this video, you know that we're about to talk fantasy reads. So this was a very hard video to even kind of comprehend because for me, I hate commitment. I hate being like, this is my all-time favorite thing, because I feel like if somebody gives me a good argument, I can be swayed a little. So I really had to sit down and say, what were my favorite fantasy reads of the year? How many did I read? What was my average? And what were my top 10? Creating a top 10 fantasy list of 2021, like not even out of all the fantasy books that I've ever read, but just out of 2021 was so incredibly hard. I do not know how you people recommend books. I don't know how you do it. So kudos to you if you make consistent recommendation videos all the time. I can barely decide what I want to eat for breakfast every day, let alone what my top favorite fantasy books are. But somehow I narrowed down this list, and that's what you're here for. So let's get started. Bum, bum, da 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 da, bum, bum, da. I am a fantasy reader. My favorite genre is fantasy. I enjoy all kinds of fantasy, whether it be historical fiction, fantasy romance, retellings, magical realism, urban fantasy. Literally, I love it all. The perfect fantasy book to me would have a mix of all things. So like a little bit of romance, a really good plot, really good characters. And to this day, I don't know if I have one of those, but a lot of fantasy books come close. In 2021, I read 93 fantasy books. Yes, everyone, you heard that. I was 7 shy of 100. If I had been a better like Virgo moon, I would have kept up with us and been like, oh, I have only 7 more to go. Let me just pump those out and get a clean 100, but it's fine. Maybe that's a goal that I can do for 2022 and somehow manage that. When I was looking at my stats, I was really blown away. I didn't realize that I had actually read that many fantasy books. Out of those 93 books, I had an average of 4.04 stars, which is also higher than what I expected it to be. I didn't realize I'd read that many fantasy books. Did not realize they were basically averaging at a 4 star. So that's pretty darn good for the number of books that I was reading. My highest month for fantasy books was June. I read 13 books, which makes sense. We had the Studio Ghibli readathon, and I think that was the month that I pumped out literally the most books all year. I tried to black out that board, and that board was huge. I think it was like 30 something books. The lowest fantasy month that I had was November, and that makes sense because I was doing NaNoWriMo and I wasn't technically reading. Try and keep me away from a fantasy book and you see what happens. So those are my stats for 2021, and just to kind of put it into perspective for you that I do read a lot of fantasy. Let's get into actual books that I want to talk to you guys about. This is the ranking as well as I can do it. This ranking is based off of my enjoyment of the book and a couple of other things, so we'll get into that right now. At slot number 10, I actually don't have this book with me because I lent it out to a friend, but it's a Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. This follows a young boy named Connor who at a certain time in his life starts seeing a monster show up every night. And at first he's kind of wary of the monster because it's really scary looking and it's in the middle of the night. And Connor is also dealing with some other very stressful things in his life. So he's like, I really don't have time for you, Mr. Monster, please go somewhere. Then, you know, after talking to him, kind of realizes that the monster has certain lessons that he can teach him. And so as the story progresses, Connor learns a lot of valuable lessons. And this is in my number 10 spot because this book actually made me cry. This book was so good. It was my first time reading it. And I actually have the edition that has the drawings in it. So it just was like that much better to me. And one of the things I love reading about is how people deal with grief and their emotions. And Connor definitely has to figure that out in this book. So it is definitely for sure my number 10 spot of the year. This was a short and sweet fantasy read, but it was a lot of fun and I learned a lot from it. You'll notice kind of a trend in this list. A lot of the fantasy books that I am going to be talking about are books that I actually got quotes from throughout the year because they are some of my favorite books. So I do want to pop up the quote for this one. It says, "Stories are important," the monster said. "They can be more important than anything if they carry the truth." And that is a major theme in A Monster Calls. So do with that what you will. Just be warned that there are heavy themes of grief and there are a few trigger warnings that you may want to look up before you read that book. Coming in at the number 9 spot in this list is The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina by Zoraida Cordova. So this book was completely unexpected. I truly did not expect it to be as good as it was. Basically, this book follows 2 main characters. One, Orquídea, who is the matriarch of the Montoya family, and 2, Marimar, who is her granddaughter. Orquídea has called the entire family to come and claim their inheritance because she is nearing the end of her life. And when the Montoya clan gets to her house, they figure out that she is under a curse of sorts. And so to break the curse, to kind of figure out what's going on with their inheritance, the Montoyas have to dive into Orquídea's past. And that's a very vague breakdown of what happens in this book, but this was just such a good book. The timelines go between Orquídea's past, so when she was younger, to Marimar's present, trying to figure out Orquídea's life and the curse that she's under. And I just thought that this book was written so well. Like, the writing was so eloquent, and the lore in this book was so well thought out and just original to me. I'm not sure if it's actually based on any kind of South American lore or things like that, but this book really just took me by surprise, and I loved it. It also has a small sci-fi element to it that, again, I was just kind of like, what? And there's a carnival. I'm like, okay, sign me up. This is one of my favorite reads of 2021. I blew through this book so quickly, and I'm so glad that it came with Book of the Month, because there's no way I would have known anything. I've never read a Zoraida Cordova, even though I do have her other like witches series on my TBR to eventually read. If you like magic set in the real world, tied in with lore, South American lore, and just kind of a generational story, then this is the fantasy read for you. Number 8 on this list is kind of a shocker because I read another book by her earlier this year and I kind of hated it. But it's Vicious by V.E. Schwab, which was a Fantasy Series book club pick this past year, and I am honestly so glad that we picked this for Fantasy Series because I truly would not have picked this book up. Like, I'm not kidding. I tried to read A Darker Shade of Magic. I finished it, but wasn't super impressed with it. Like, I still have not continued that series. And so when Fantasy Series voted on Vicious, I was like, I don't know. But this ended up being one of my favorite books, and also I do love Vengeful as well, but Vicious definitely is like top tier. So this follows Victor and Eli, 2 roommates in college, and they are trying to prove a theory. And that theory is that they can create superheroes called EOs. And they don't exactly call them superheroes, they're just kind of like superhumans, but basically based off of the trauma / way that you die and kind of like your mindset as you die, they have a theory that they can make superhumans. And I just found this book to be so freaking good. There are a lot of questions about good and evil in this book. Like, if we have a certain view of what's evil, does that mean that the other thing against that thing is good? I felt like the name of this duology, I guess now it's gonna be a trilogy, but the villains duology, like, I really thought that was so appropriate because at times, like, you know that Victor is not a good guy, right? But I still loved him as a character, and I just really enjoyed this book. It was incredibly thought-provoking, definitely had some of my favorite tropes, like the found family trope, gave me some X-Men-ish vibes, but the quote that I really liked from this book was, someone could call themselves a hero and still walk around killing dozens. Someone else could be labeled a villain for trying to stop them. Plenty of humans were monstrous, and plenty of monsters knew how to play at being human. That's what V.E. said. She said, let me throw some knowledge on you. And that is Vicious. Highly recommend this, especially if you're into like superheroes and like that kind of fantasy set in the real world. A morally gray character, found family trope, but this was a really good book. Number 8. Number 7 on this list was also a like left field book. I got it as a NetGalley ARC from Wattpad, so I really had zero expectations. When I say zero, this book, the most unexpected of 2021. That book is Crossbones by Kimberly Vale. I did not know that this was gonna be such a perfect pirate fantasy, and it was such a perfect pirate fantasy. I know you guys have probably heard me talk about this a little bit. This basically is a pirate fantasy that follows 3 main points of view. 2 of the POVs are pirate captains, and then the third is a stowaway. There essentially is a pirate king in this universe, and that king dies. So all of the pirate captains, you know, they're all trying to be the next pirate lord, right? So to be the next pirate lord, you have to kind of go through these trials at the crossbones. As these captains are traveling to go partake in these trials, there happens to be a stowaway on one of the boats, because lo and behold, pirates who do bad things have people that don't like them. So i.e. stowaway wants to have a revenge plot. Anyway, this was so unexpected and so much fun. This is a YA fantasy, and I really truly did not think I was gonna have a YA fantasy on this list, but this one was really good. I've been looking for a pirate fantasy that I can actually recommend people and like get behind, and this is definitely that book. It has not only strong female leads, strong male leads, but the fantasy plot is a lot of fun, and I honestly cannot wait to get to the second one. And that's all I'm gonna say about that. Coming in at number 6 on this list, I know I'm already gonna get smack from Jéla about this, but it's Black Sun, of course. So I did accidentally soft DNF this at the beginning of the year. Hear me out. First off, it's a little confusing because there are 3 POVs, and really you get thrown in the middle of things. Like, you really don't know what's going on. I don't have a lot of experience reading pre-Columbian inspired fantasy books, so that's on me, but I was a little confused. That, and also there are time jumps in this book that are measured by like years of the sun and like X amount of days until convergence. And at the time I had no idea what those things were, so my brain was just like, throw it out. Anyway, once I picked this book back up, I really enjoyed it. And as you can see, I tabbed it. Basically, like I said, it follows 3 main points of view. One is a priest, one is a pirate captain, and the third, Serapio, is our young main man who is going on a journey, a quest. What is that quest? You find out in this book, but there is a ton of political intrigue. Like, this adult fantasy is so good. And the way that everything comes together in the end of this book, you're just kind of like, what? I cannot wait until the next book comes out, and I know people are so upset about the cover, but I'm into it. So anyway, you might be interested in this if you are into pre-Columbian adult fantasy books. I will say check out the trigger warnings, because there are some, like, what's the word for it? Our main character is blind, and it is because of things that happen to him, if that makes sense. So check those trigger warnings if that is something that you're not into or you might be a little queasy about. Also, the like love interest, I mean, there's not like a lot of love, but like the little love that's there, that's really all I need in a fantasy. I don't need it to be a full-on adult fantasy romance. You know, sometimes that gets a little too much, but like this, I was like pining for the romance. It's just a freaking good book. So if you're interested in that, highly recommend. Okay, now we're getting into probably the hardest part of this video. Number 5 on this list is a tried and true favorite, Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. Okay, so I am obsessed with the Outlander TV show, and I've actually never read the Outlander books before, but I've heard that they follow closely to the books, so I decided to read the first book this year. This book took me forever to read, and it's not because I hated it, it's just because the book is so dang long. It's like 600 pages. But this is a historical fantasy following Claire, our main character, who is from 1945, like she's a doctor during World War II, and on her honeymoon after the war gets transported to 1700s Scotland, where she meets a very fine Scotsman named Jamie. Anyway, this is such a good historical fiction fantasy. So if that is something that you're into, like you really love to have just a little bit of fantasy in there with your historical fiction, this is the book for you. Also, the romance in this one is like one of my top tier romances ever. Like the way that Jamie loves Claire, and Claire really doesn't be doing much, you know, to like be like, hey Jamie, I like you. Like, she really doesn't say that kind of stuff, but Jamie is over here having these super cute quotes. Like, I think I even posted one on our Instagram. Like, the way Jamie loves Claire is the way that I want to love something in this world. This really was kind of like, I want to say it was a nostalgia read, but I've never actually read Outlander before, so it was just fun to read it for the first time. And it is also very appropriate that this makes this list because we are doing an Outlander read-along, which if you guys are interested in that, I will link the hosts and the Discord down below. You can join and read the Outlander series with us this year. I cannot believe we're reading it, but it's gonna be a wild, long, fun time. What more else can I say? Like, I really just love the setting of this book, and the writing is so like rich. Like, you can really picture everything that's happening in this book. Like I said, if you're into historical fiction with like a little bit of fantasy with that Scottish lore, because that's what it's based off of, then this is the book for you. Okay, everybody. We're getting to the end of this list. This was probably the hardest part. Seriously, could not decide, okay? Because I love all of these books differently, but also they're all 5 stars. So, plot twist. I mean, Outlander was 5 stars, but like, they're all 5 stars, and I love all these books in different ways. So to kind of categorize them in 1, 2, 3, 4, like, that was really hard for me. But anyway, okay. Number 4. The Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty. Okay, so if you guys have not heard of the Daevabad trilogy, where have you been? I said that to myself when I started City of Brass. So this is actually the second book in the Daevabad trilogy. It is a Mina-inspired adult fantasy, Mina being Middle Eastern North African inspired. But basically this follows Nari, a young woman who accidentally summons an ancient Jinn warrior, and that Jinn warrior takes her to the city of Daevabad, where she realizes she might be a little more unusual than she thought she was. I'm like, Nari, my girl, if you didn't realize you could do things after summoning an ancient Jinn warrior, like, what did you think you could do? Anyway, this whole entire trilogy is just such a fun ride, and this is definitely my favorite because the ending of this series really just messed me up. But if you're interested in Middle Eastern North African inspired fantasy series, adult fantasy series, then this is definitely the book for you. This book has some of my favorite tropes in it. It has the found family trope. It's got a strong female lead. It's got this amazing center of lore, and just the setting of this world is beautiful. Like, you can vividly picture everything when you're reading it. I will highly recommend the audiobook. That's actually how I read this series. Eventually, I'm gonna go back and like tab it, but the audiobooks for these are so good. So good. I was like howling, having a good time with this whole entire trilogy. And I know that going forward, anything that S.A. Chakraborty writes, I will be immediately buying. So that's where I'm at. We're at that point where if any of these next couple of authors puts out anything, I will be buying the thing and I will be reading the thing. So Miss S.A. definitely has earned her place in my heart. This is, like I said, such a good trilogy, and if you haven't read it, I highly, highly, highly recommend. Okay, I'm hoping that I'm making sense because at this point my brain is mush, so let's continue. Number 3 on this list is not going to be a surprise to most of you. It might be a surprise that it is number 3, but neither here nor there. All right, so number 3 is A Court of Silver Flames. Y'all know I couldn't go without giving credit to my baby daddy, Cassian. Okay, my book boyfriend, my life, my love. Love him. Okay, so A Court of Silver Flames, if you guys don't know what this book is, it's part of Sarah J. Maas's kind of series that follows a cast of fae warriors as they tumble through life. That is like a baseline of what the whole entire series is about, but this specific book follows Nesta, my favorite character from this entire series, who is a grump. She is a nasty character. She has PTSD, she's got anxiety, she's got depression, she has a whole list of issues, and this is the book where she figures out how to combat that, how to deal with it, and how to move on with her life, while also finding love, accepting the love that she deserves. I just love this book so much, and I know that it does not have a very good fantasy plot. I will be the first one to tell y'all, okay? The fantasy plot is not the best, okay? But this is a fantasy romance, and I have found, as I have delved into more fantasy romance this year, it's very hard to have a good fantasy romance plot with a fantasy world. I have not found the perfect one. Yeah. because this is not the perfect one, you know, but I love these characters so much. That's what Sarah J Maas does. She writes characters that you can get behind, that you can love, even when their stories aren't amazing. And I think that's one of the best things about Sarah J Maas is that she can just create these worlds based off of lore and based off of other myths, but her characters are just so lovable and relatable. And I think that's why I love Nesta so much. I love her. I think she's incredibly misunderstood by those that hate her. And, you know, Cassian is one of my baby daddies. Anyway, really enjoyed this book, sped through it. I know it's a lot, but it was so much fun this year. And of course I had to make this list. So A Court of Silver Flames, everybody. If you're this far into the video and we are at number 2, if you can guess what it is, I'd love for you to leave a comment down below. You know, I like to play that little game. Number 2 on this list is my other book boyfriend, my book husband, really, because this would be my ultimate man, I believe. It is The Wicked King by Holly Black. So obviously this is book 2 in her trilogy, the Cruel Prince trilogy. And I think out of all 3 of the books, this is the strongest for things that I'm looking for. So what I mean by that is political intrigue, slight sprinkle of romance, action, the plot, the characters, the setting. I think all of those things are the strongest in this book. If you guys don't know what The Cruel Prince is about, it follows Jude, a human girl who has been taken to the Fae realm with her twin sister and is forced to grow up around fairies who can kill her at any time because she is a human. They can control her at any time, and she has to basically survive off of her wits, and actually that's it, because they're literally stronger than her too. So she literally has to be smarter than everybody else in the room. I think this entire trilogy has some of the best politics I've ever read. And it's so impressive to me because it's not that big of a book. It's a little over 300 pages. And that is crazy to me, because to have that much going back and forth, like red line, you know, politics going through here, and to have it actually make sense, what? You have to be such a good writer. So Holly Black, wow, you blew my mind with this book. The entire trilogy, I think it's incredibly underrated, and I know it does get a lot of hate because of the romance, because people say there's not enough romance, but I think what Holly Black does as a writer is she writes things that you kind of have to see between the lines, and for me, I really enjoyed that. I loved getting to know Jude and Cardan. I love their relationship and the meaning underneath their words. Like, I really just think that Holly Black is such a good writer. Her mind, everybody, crazy freaking amazing. This low-key is what inspired Fantaseries, our book club. Okay, so like, we have a lot to thank Miss Holly Black for. I definitely, like I said, am going to be automatically buying any of her new books. I'm going through her backlist, and I'm very excited for her new adult fantasy book, I guess her debut adult fantasy, Book of Night. I think that's gonna be super good. And last but not least, this one is actually a no-brainer. If you go on our Goodreads and you've been keeping up with our reviews, I definitely reviewed this one the most from the whole entire year. This was the one, besides Outlander, that I just wrote because it moved me, okay? Number 1 on this list is Cersei by Madeline Miller. I know. You guys are like, where is the fantasy romance? There's a lot to unpack with this book, a lot to unpack, but I think it does such a good job as a retelling, as a story, as a feminist anthem, just all of it. The whole thing is a masterpiece. It is incredibly slow paced. Yes, but the payoff of this book really makes you think. And I think for me, I do value books that make me think, and books that have like good plot twists, good plot, good characters, things that like make me care about it. And I think this is definitely one of those books, especially the ending. This book really like just hit my heart right in the middle. It just was so freaking good. And there also is something to be said about the Greek myths. I have always loved Greek myths, so I think, is it number 1 because it's part nostalgia? Maybe, don't know. But I think that this book just does such a great job of kind of making you realize that our whole entire lives, Greek myths have been passed down from mouth to mouth, generation to generation, right? Storyteller to storyteller. And in those ways, they've been passed down from man to man to man. So we get the men's perspective. And I think that Madeline Miller did such a good job of writing the woman's perspective with Cersei. My whole entire life, I have thought Cersei was a bad guy. My whole entire life. I thought that she was an evil witch. And I read this book and it really made me think about perspective, points of view, and seeing another person's side of the story. And I think for a book to be able to do that, it's number one, baby. It's number one. Like it's making me emotional just kind of like thinking about it, how good this book is. Cersei also has to go through so much in this book, just overcome so much. She goes through a situation of sexual assault. She goes through heartbreak and everything. The totality of it is heartbreaking while also having such a hopeful ending. Such a good ending. I love it. It does have a fun setting, but it's not so much about that. It's more about a character-driven, slow-paced story, a beautiful character arc, lots of themes, lots of lessons, and just overall greatness. Like, this is one of the best books I've ever read, and I get it. You've heard a lot about it. You've probably seen it everywhere, but it really is so good. And I think if you are into classic literature at all, if you like retellings, like Greek retellings specifically, if you are interested in a feminist perspective, interested in character-driven stories, beautiful character arcs, and just like a freaking journey, you should read this book. Up until the very, very end, I wasn't sure how it was going to end. I was like, if I am upset at the end of this, I'm going to really be upset. You know what I mean? Because like, I don't like to read things where the end payoff is not good, but the payoff is there. It's good. It's worth it for sure. Whew. Okay. I feel like I just ranted for like 50 hours. The sun is officially down. I'm sure there are really weird shadows happening behind me. But yeah, guys, that's it. Those are my top 10 fantasy reads of 2021. I can't believe I'm saying that because I read so many books. I don't know how I narrowed them down, but I think if I had to kind of think about it, these books are definitely books that made me think. They made me feel a lot. They had amazing stories. Some of them had really great romances. Some of them were surprising. Some of them walked the line of good and evil. And I think overall, these are just some of the greatest fantasy stories that I read in 2021. Now, that's not to say that there are not a lot of good fantasy books that I read. There are so many. And it was really, 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 like when I say it was really hard, there were so, like I have all these fantasy books around me right now. So I think what I am going to do next for you guys is have a fantasy recommendation video that just kind of goes into a couple different categories of fantasy, but we'll get into that at a later date. Right now, we're gonna end this video because I've been sitting in front of this for so long and it's really weird to be here by myself without Monique. So yeah, those are my top 10 fantasy books of 2021. If you happen to have read any of these books, if you happen to agree or disagree, I would love to hear what you guys think. I am always trying to read new fantasy books because fantasy is my favorite genre because it takes me away from the real world. It gives me a chance to see into somebody else's imagination and to see the characters that they have concocted and the relationships and the world. That to me is just like one of the most powerful things on this planet. So that's why fantasy is so amazing to me. So anyway, ranting over, emotions over. If you guys happen to have an amazing fantasy book that I didn't talk about in this video, please drop it down below because like I said, I'm always looking for fantasy recs. And yeah, if you guys like this video, give it a like for me. Let me know if you guys want any other recommendation videos, like fantasy recommendations, specific fantasy books perhaps. I know that I am going to be delving into more of the traditional classic fantasy this year, as well as trying to read more fantasy, which like I said, how can I read more than I did last year? I'm gonna do it, guys. I'm gonna do it. If you guys want to support me and Monique on this channel, click that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell if you don't want to miss another video from us. And I'm gonna go because I've been here for way too long. So until our next video, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.